Okay, good morning, everyone. As we've heard already this morning, we know that Kern County is an energy leader, not just in California, but worldwide. We've got the second largest oil production of any county in the state, or any county in the U.S. rather, and we have the largest solar and wind farms in the U.S. Despite our push for an all-in energy solution here in Kern County, we as Californians still import oil from other oil-rich countries at the rate of about 350 million barrels per year. So that costs us about $26.6 billion a year as well. So this equates to exporting more than $73 million per day from California to these other countries to get the energy that we need, the crude oil energy. The latest data from the California Energy Commission shows that California fuel consumption is at its highest level since 2009, continuing our dependency on foreign sources for energy needs. It doesn't seem to be like a logical future for our state. The solution of ample, affordable energy for the world's fifth largest economy is about finding a workable, sustainable balance across equally important concerns for the environment, our shared sense of social equality, and our economy, of course. That is truly a sustainable energy future. That being said, I'll introduce my esteemed panel, starting with Erik Stokes next to me. He runs the Energy Deployment and Market Facilitation Office at the CEC. His team oversees basically the kind of the science projects, you know, the new technologies that are going to help us get to these new goals and these new places that we need to be in terms of energy. Next to him is Campbell. He is a Deputy Supervisor for the Inland District of California's Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, which is responsible for overseeing approximately 80% of the state's oil and gas production, permitting and field compliance monitoring. And finally, we have on the very end, John Borkovich. He's the Groundwater Monitoring Section Chief at California Water Board, State Water Board. His program oversees the groundwater ambient monitoring assessment program and the oil and gas production water groundwater monitoring programs. So we'll break a little bit from tradition in terms of the panel, and we won't be asking each person questions, but we'll just ask each one of our members to kind of give from their own individual perspective and their agency's perspective, you know, kind of what their future outlook on energy and regulatory trends in California are at this point, and then we'll open it up for questions. So we'll start with you, Erik.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. My name is Erik Stokes. As mentioned, I'm with the California Energy Commission. Did we lose? No, there. For those who may not be familiar with the California Energy Commission, we are the state's primary energy policy and planning agency. One of the core functions of the California Energy Commission is to advance new energy science and technologies. And on average, we provide around $160 million each year in new funding to advance new technologies to a stage where they can attract private sector investment. And these are technologies that are really aligned with trying to achieve some of California's ambitious energy policy goals. I'll provide just a little bit of context going back. What I mentioned is we try to bring these technologies to a stage where they can begin to attract some of that private sector investment. Around 8 or 9 years ago, a lot of the venture capital firms, especially those in Sand Hill Road that were funding a lot of the Facebooks and Twitters, they tried their hand in energy, and they got burned pretty badly. They didn't really understand what they were doing. They didn't understand the companies they were really investing in, and the companies weren't very sophisticated in how to scale up and bring new technologies to market. And as a result from that, the venture capital industry essentially got out of the clean energy sector. About 5 years ago, we began to think about what were some of the challenges that really kind of led to this, and what can we do from a state perspective to really try to foster clean tech entrepreneurship across the state. So we put a set of programs in place we call the California Energy Innovation Ecosystem. And so one of the first of those programs was a funding opportunity to create what we called regional energy innovation clusters. And this included 4 regions within the state, one of those being the Central Valley, and an organization or consortium led by Blue Tech Valley, including a number of stakeholder organizations within the Central Valley, applied and essentially won kind of a $5 million grant, as well as kind of the recognition to be the Central Valley Energy Innovation Cluster, and really to be kind of the boots on the ground to really kind of foster and develop these clean tech entrepreneurs and kind of really guide them through a lot of the challenges and when you're trying to bring and develop and scale a new energy technology, which is one of the most challenging sectors for new technologies. We complemented that with a program we call CalSeed, which provides $150,000 in seed funding to really kind of demonstrate proof of concept for some of these new technologies and really kind of show their merits, not just from a technology standpoint, but also from kind of a commercial standpoint. Is there really a value proposition that the investment community, that customers are going to see in these technologies, and let them kind of use the results from this initial funding to then be able to attract larger private and public sector investments. So this was kind of our first foray into really try to not just foster successful energy entrepreneurship, but make that successful and avoid a lot of the pitfalls that I think a lot of entrepreneurs being new to this space encounter. And so I'll go ahead and stop there and
Thank you. My name is Campbell. I'm with the Department of Conservation's Division of Oil and Gas, located here in Bakersfield at our field office for the Inland District, which we oversee about 80% of the state's oil and gas production and extraction. And so our kind of mission and vision is really the wise development of the hydrocarbon, but in a safe manner, protecting the environment, people, and really the communities that they operate in. And so back in 2012, as everybody is kind of aware, we had peak price of oil. We had a couple of independent audits, one of which was through the EPA, and they found some shortcomings. One of that is part of the renewal plan, as mentioned, is our staffing was kind of inadequate, really low. So we've had a big kind of resurgence in the last few years. I'm part of that, where we brought on a lot of people from various backgrounds that had the technological advanced skill sets needed to really look at projects for permitting, for underground storage projects, aquifer exemptions, and so forth, and really just looking back and doing an audit of our own selves. So we've worked with various agencies such as the State Water Board, the regional water boards, many of you out in the audience with your companies, and really just getting back to the base level of where we're at. I'm proud to say we're getting there, we're turning the corner, but we've learned a lot of lessons along the way, which is how do we continue this in a much fast kind of paced environment, using science and data and making those decisions based off of the science and data rather than just assumptions, or just simply not having the time to evaluate it, so we just endorse and move on. And that's really our focus. And so what we're looking at doing in consultation with other agencies is how do we streamline some of the times that you all submit permits, everything is being submitted. As mentioned with ERA and the Bell Ridge Solar Complex, there's a lot of regulatory agencies that we work with in partnership. So that's our next, I think, focus in the near term. With that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you. My name is John Borkovich. I'm the Groundwater Monitoring Section Chief at the State Water Resources Control Board in Sacramento. And thanks, Lorelei, for warming up the crowd before we got here. But I appreciate the offer to come, and I'm happy to be here to give my perspective on where we are right now at the water boards with respect to energy production, in particular Kern County. So many of you we've worked with in the oil industry with respect to the work that Cameron mentioned on aquifer exemptions, as well as underground injection control and well stimulation, SB4 related regulatory oversight. So we've hit the ground running. There's been a lot of growth at the state and at the regional boards with respect to regulatory oversight in the oil industry in the recent years. So working together, meeting and engaging at this level in conferences, as well as ongoing dialogue, and working with Dogger and with other agencies with respect to potential areas where we may have disagreements. We work through those disagreements and try to come up with a solution to cases where we may have to say no. But I think for the most part, the work that's going on with respect to the reuse of produced water, much of the oil production in Kern County pulls water out of the ground more so than oil. So there needs to be something that we do with the water. Up to this point, water that has much less salinity, like on the east side here in the Bakersfield area, you have the options to be able to reuse that water. That water has been reused for several years. The Regional Water Board and out of the Fresno office, in particular Rancho Cordova Central Valley Regional Board, have been conducting an ongoing food safety panel to look at the continued use of produced water on growing food and see if that's safe. It's been done for several decades without any indication that there is any problems with it, but they're looking more carefully at that with a panel group, and they're coming up with a report to identify areas where it could be an issue, but so far there seems to be making progress with respect to that. So we're looking at other reuse. I was happy to see in the presentation about the reuse of the water for the solar projects. That's something that the water boards embrace. We have our Sustainable Groundwater Monitoring Act work that we work with the Department of Water Resources on at the State Water Board. That's not part of one of my programs, but that's something that you all are familiar with, as well as we have our sustainable group within our DWQ that just kicked off, with recycled water being a key part of that, and looking at options to reuse water wherever we can. Thank you.
Okay, so now you heard a little bit about our perspectives on you know, what the mission is for each of these guys, individual organizations. I'll open it up for questions. I know you don't get a chance to throw rocks at this group very often, so I'll invite you to do so. Or not. No questions? Come on. Okay, Melissa.
I'm Melissa Morris from CRC. John, I'll start with an easy one. Can you explain the difference in the roles between the regional water boards and the state water board?
Sure. In real, you know, oversimplified way of looking at it is that the state board is responsible for administering water rights in the state. That's one major part of our organization, as well as the loans and grants, working with getting the money available from, you know, propositions, et cetera, from bonds and other supporting mechanisms for water projects, as well as the administering of programs such as our oil and gas groundwater monitoring programs. So we're responsible for collaborating and working with the regional boards. The regional boards are responsible for more on-the-ground permitting, one-on-one. So if you have a waste discharge requirement with the regional board, they're responsible for working with the regulated entities. So another aspect that the state board has, if there's a disagreement between a responsible party and the regional boards, they can appeal, or what we call a petition. So the state board's responsible for reviewing those particular cases. So that's kind of in a nutshell what oversimplification of what the differences are.
Any other questions? I got one relative to a program that your group does administer, John. It's the groundwater assessment program. Will the data that we are now collecting through SB4 and some of the other groundwater monitoring programs, irrigated lands regulatory program, will that data become part of your Gamma program? And will that be a tool that we can all use then for project planning and knowing where maybe a shorter path to get projects approved?
Yes, we're making that data available through the Gamma information system and other portals where maybe the data weren't collected in a format that's compatible, but we've got a data hub that's been recently released on our Gamma, or Groundwater Ambient Monitoring Assessment website. sort of a dashboard so you can access Gamma information system as well as other areas where the U.S. Geological Survey information would be more readily available in a GIS-related format. So we're excited about the release of that, and those information and data will be made available through those portals.
Fantastic. I got a question for Cameron as well. So I know a big push in order to get your staff back up to the levels that you need. We see that in the form of a lot more field inspections. And so I guess more of a statement than a question. It would be nice to also have published data about the number of negative assessments that go on for you guys. And so not just the number of enforcement actions that were taken, but it would be nice for the public to be able to see that you're out there literally thousands of hours a year, and the vast majority, I think, not going out on a limb too far here, is that the vast majority of times you find very clean operations and things that aren't going wrong. So it'd be nice to make sure that the public gets the benefit of those inspections in that way as well.
We do have a new program coming online. Many of you have heard about it. It's called WellStar. And that program, our 4th module that'll be released here coming into 2019, actually it covers the field witnessing and field surveying programs. But to speak to your point, a testament to our field staff, and so we're increasing our what we call inspections, but really it's broken up into 4 separate zones, which is one is just really the oil field operations, the plugging and abandoning of wells, making sure that we're meeting those, groundwater zones are being sealed off or formations are being sealed off. And then we also have the UIC testing. And so those are the tests that are required by EPA that we administer, such as the 2-stage annular testing, the MIT. It's really a 2-part test. And so that just ensures that the zones that are approved for injecting are actually being injected into. And so the others, lease inspections, it's, unfortunately, some of the requirements that we're having now, it's really maybe the 1 or 2 industry operators that has an issue that we kind of gravitate towards and said we can't let that happen anymore. Maybe there was something in regulation that prohibited us from actually taking action on a really egregious operator who just didn't care. And that really gives us as a regulatory agency kind of a tarnished image, but it also gives the industry a tarnished image. And so that's the other part. But to give credit to our folks, we're staffing up here in the Inland District up to about 40 field staff who kind of uncover most of those. And I'd say on any given day, they're not finding anything wrong, which is a really good thing. It's the 1 or 2 cases they'll see something. Sometimes it's just a minor stuffing box that's leaking. We call up the operator, say, hey, this needs to get taken care of. And that's where the operators take the due diligence. And one thing I'm finding is really beneficial is now they're taking kind of a swath around more of their fields. So they might fix the 1 well, but now they're going to go take a look around maybe a quarter mile. They're going to go drive to a lot of the other wells. So in a way, I think it's a mutual effort. And so we educate them, hey, this is stuff that we have to regulate. But again, if kind of like Laura Lee's, if somebody's coming from the LA area and they're driving through one of the oil fields and they see it, they might not understand what it is, but now, we're taking 10 steps back because of the image that's portrayed. And so we're trying to be more of a proactive agency rather than a reactive agency, I think, for a better part.
So that was time for you guys to think of more questions. I don't see any hands going up. So I'll ask one to Erik. We hear from Lorelei and others about constrictions on transmission. Any insights, any technology innovations you can share with us in terms of things that you guys are working on and to increase our ability to transport power from one spot to the next?
So maybe not on the transmission side, but there was a lot of talk about SB 100 and the Renewable Portfolio Standard, and most of that generation is expected to be met with solar PV and wind. There's challenges with those resources, and that's really the intermittency. And so we've had a big focus on some of these low carbon resources that don't have some of these intermittency challenges, mainly in the form of storage. But it's good to hear a lot about geothermal because I think it is a resource that might be primed to see some new development. Some of the technology advancements in fracking and drilling are starting to migrate their way over towards geothermal. And it could start to really make the case for the economics behind new geothermal development, especially if some of these new projects can provide what we call flexible generation, as opposed, and deal with some of the intermittency challenges with solar PV and wind that's really going to be needed, especially as we start to get towards kind of that 50% renewable target and then beyond with SB 100.
Okay, so still don't see any hands. Okay, we got one.
So my name is Noah. My question, I think, is probably for John on the water recycling, reusing that water. Do you have any more specifics on studies or tests that are being done on how that water could be reused, or companies that are doing that recycling to reuse that water in agriculture or other industrial purposes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to kind of reiterate, there's more than one oil company collaborating with a water district for the water to be shared with them through what we call water reuse. So the produced water is pulled out of the ground with oil, it's separated, and the water's delivered. There needs to be permits with the regional water board. So in those cases where the regional water board is looking at those projects, again, there was some additional scrutiny a few years ago that was applied to the regional boards. Hey, is the food safe to eat? Well, the regional boards and the water boards don't have an area of expertise with respect to if food's safe to eat. So they convened this panel to look at that. So it's multi-agency, multidisciplined group that meets regularly up in Rancho Cordova outside of Sacramento at the regional board's offices, Central Valley Board, and they've had several meetings. This group meets pretty regularly. They're collaborating with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Dr. Stringfellow is leading that group, and they're looking at the chemicals that are in produced water more carefully, and also testing the food. So the results of those studies, in particular for California in the Central Valley, are coming out of that particular study. So there's proposed to be a white paper delivered. Additional information is available on the Central Valley Board's website. They have many presentations by Dr. Stringfellow and others. The Coahuila Water District has done their own independent studies looking at that food safety. So that's related specifically to the reuse of water for irrigation of crops. However, there potentially are other areas where water could be reused, and it's oftentimes going on in the oil field. Produced water is reused for application of after treatment for steam, for instance. There is a waste stream, though, eventually, and what Cameron was mentioning about underground injection control, we've been working with Dogger on the review of those permits to ensure that groundwater resources are protected. So there are studies that are out there. I would refer to the Central Valley Water Board's website. You'll have access to all the presentations that they've done and any information related more specifically to delve into that particular aspect. But as far as any other studies, I can't think of any off the top of my head that relate to other uses where they've looked at it more carefully.
Any more questions? Any comments? Robin.
Hi, I'm Robin with Chevron, and I have a question for all three of you. We have a new governor as of 9 o'clock last night. So, thank you, Michelle. We have a new governor, so do you feel like with Newsom, who's made some real interesting comments about the oil and gas industry and some of his campaigning, do you feel like your departments will be maybe under more scrutiny with Newsom, or too soon to tell, or what are your thoughts about some of his policies that he's claimed to want to institute or continue?
I think from the Department of Conservation, Division of Oil and Gas, I think it's really too soon to tell. However, one thing about the administration changes is that for us, we start to see, again, with all the regulations that have just been kind of working up, you kind of hear things, what ifs, but I don't think we would see necessarily anything drastic. And part of it's just because of the overall, just one person doesn't make the change, and that's one thing that's kind of beneficial with government, is that not one person has all the power. So whether or not, again, he appoints new directors and so forth, I think it's too early to tell. And then again, maybe some of those are sound bites, as Laura Lee mentioned. Gets the votes, and then once he's in office and he's staffed up and he's brought up to speed on many of the events, maybe there's a reality as to, well, geez, this does have an effect. But I think right now it's just too early to tell.
I would just echo that. It's probably too soon to tell. I think one issue that hasn't been resolved that came out of SB 100 is really the idea of the regional grid and being able to expand the independent system operator to other states. And that's been kind of a point of discussion for the past couple years, and we still haven't come to whether it's going to happen or not. So I saw a soundbite from him that he did mention that. So I think there will be some oversight, or at least some involvement from the governor's office continuing into that concept of regional grid.
So I would agree with Cameron. I think it's too soon to tell, but I would expect that at least at the beginning of the administration, there would be quite a bit of involvement, not at my level, but with our board chair as well as our executive management on briefing the governor on what the status is of the particular programs that are of interest to him. So there may be, out of that, additional work providing briefings and so forth to bring them up to speed. But as far as expectation on anything different, I think that the current governor, the outgoing governor, has been very engaged with the water board's involvement with Dogger on the review of underground injection and oil and gas in general. So I wouldn't expect that to change too much from this administration.
Any further questions? Okay. Seeing none, thank you all for your time.